Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
Y'all ready for this?
Average Jocks fans, this week we welcome the voice of NHL on EA Sports, James Cybulski. James, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Where's no canned applause, no live studio audience?
We don't have a live studio audience. Who was it, though, that had us edit in some applause?
I can't remember now. I don't know.
Was it Cabby?
It might have been Cabby.
I think it was Cabby. Yeah, he's all like, "You guys have to get. I'll edit in some applause."
No, because nobody's cheering for me.
Yeah, I think people would.
I don't know. My brother seemed to be pretty.
My parents would probably. Yeah, they'd be the two people clapping.
Awesome.
My brother was pretty jealous that I was talking to you today. So that's a win for me.
It is funny. Adam, how old's your brother?
He's 35.
Oh, okay, all right, man. Well, that's cool. I'll take that. I'll take that as a win. Yeah, typically it's funny because I think with the video game in recent years, there's a whole new demographic that has, I guess, discovered me as a personality, a broadcaster, or however you want to view it. But obviously, with the video game, there's a younger generation. So, we had a guest on our Clearing the Crease podcast with Mike Commodore and Andrew Raycroft. I mean, Mike played a dozen years in the National Hockey League, won a Stanley Cup. I mean, Calder Trophy Rookie of the Year, plays with Toronto, plays with Boston, like some pretty hallowed stuff, Vancouver as well. And we had this one guest who came on and he kind of remarked at the end of the interview. This is the only one who's ever done this, I should preface, but he was just like, man, like my kid didn't care about you other guys, but man, he was pretty pumped at 8 years old knowing that he was going to talk to James Cybulski from NHL 23. So that was small victory, I guess, if you will, for those little moments. But yeah, I'm always flattered. I mean, it's I was a big fan of the business, before I got in. So I'm a big believer of trying to treat people the way you want to be treated. And yeah, just so tell your brother I said what's up and tell him thanks, Adam.
Well, if he's a loyal fan, he would hear it. He'll hear it himself. But I'll let him know you said that.
Yeah, don't mention it for
right.
a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Let's see if he says anything.
Yeah, I even trying to get my dad. To watch the podcast, but he literally has dial-up, fast-speed internet still because he lives out in the country. And he's like, "How do I get your podcast on the computer?" Like, well, Dad, you gotta. It's a whole thing, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, it's funny. Like my parents they were in Eastern Ontario. They were in the Ottawa Valley for years, and like really only in the last few years did they finally get high-speed internet. Like it was still kind of dial-up up until just a few years ago, which was shocking. We go and visit. Like they finally got some cell towers in the area. That took, they were there for about 20 years, and yeah, I think it took about 12 years before a cell tower went in. Because and when you're working, sometimes you're on the road, take a few days off, and you got to, you check your messages to make sure, Gretzky hasn't gone down in a plane crash or anything along those lines, right? And just make sure there's nothing calamitous has happened. And you'd have to, call the home phone and call your voicemail. And I mean, nobody leaves voicemail now, but in those days, still people did. But anyway, We've come a long ways. Hopefully, your dad gets some of that modern technology at some point as well.
Well, he's from the Ottawa Valley too, so I mean, maybe they're from the same area. So
nice. Where's your dad?
He lives in Cobden.
My parents they were up in Golden Lake, which you got to a certain point. I think once you get to the highway, you got to either turn right to Cobden or left to Eganville, Golden Lake. So
yeah, I know exactly where that is. Yeah,
being a southpaw, that was they're in Arnprior now, so the drive's not as far. So
okay. I was in Arnprior a few weeks ago. Got a tattoo.
Oh, look at you! How's that for random? You went to Arnprior. You went to Arnprior to get a tattoo.
Yeah, no, I I was looking for a very specific tattoo. I'm a devout golden retriever dog dad. And I did my research to find tattoo artists that did portrait style tattoos of animals. And
Yep.
there was a wonderful lady from Arnprior that does them. Her and her husband, they moved from Toronto to Arnprior to open up a tattoo shop, which kind of seems strange, but that's what they did, and she did a fantastic job. Yeah.
I would just say that my one takeaway from that, Joel, is that you did your own research.
I did.
That didn't always age well, those comments in sports in the last few years, right? I did my own research.
Well, that's why we are just
big Aaron Rodgers
average
fan, huh?
Jocks. We are just average.
Yeah.
Nice.
Best Friday.
All right.
Yeah.
What do you guys want to dive in? What are we talking?
All right.
I don't know.
Well, you've.
I have a couple. I mean, not a couple of things, but my basic research. Well, you went to school in Ottawa.
Yep.
Obviously, actually, I wanted to do radio broadcasting. That was my thing, but realized I wasn't allowed to swear, so that kind of killed my vibe there. But like, how was it? Like how was that program? Like, how much did that actually help you? Develop what you wanted to do for a living?
I had zero desire to want to take that program initially, and it was kind of a backup. I had never been into a radio station. My heart, my mind was set on television broadcasting, which was the program at Algonquin College when I went, and I had applied and I didn't get in. I think it was a very competitive program at that period of time, and the one thing I kind of learned is when I went to in my time in the radio broadcasting program is that most of the class, most of them had an undergrad. Most of them were university grads, and then were, going to school. So I was one of the few that had just come right out of high school, but I didn't get into the TV program, and I got into radio, and I thought I'll transfer over after a year, and but I'll say this: I think radio really shaped me as a broadcaster. Just learning how to, broadcast, learning how to communicate, learning how to talk. I learned how to. It's funny because of what I had to do a lot of growing up. I was very immature when I first started, but I somehow survived that first semester, and then obviously, my marks and everything kind of really grew exponentially, and really started to apply myself. It was the first time really as a student. I wasn't a great high school student, but it was the first time as a student that I really was passionate about what I was doing. And part of that was because in the second year of the program, can you guys still hear me?
There we go.
We can hear you great.
Yeah.
Laptop guy.
I you know what I think happened was I think my computer overheated just sitting there in the cooking sun. Like all of a sudden it's piping hot here. So
where are you right now?
I'm just I'm in the kitchen now. So
I figured
right?
that. I just meant location wise.
Location wise, I moved inside
from the fridge.
Yeah, I mean, look at that. I mean, yes, not exactly a sexy visual. And you know what? The kids slept. We just had an office built in our backyard that my wife and I used, but of course the kids had a sleepover in it last night, so it looks like a ragtag affair. So, all right, we can simply explain to the audience if you want to do that, or I can just simply pick it up from the question. You tell me what's easier for you.
We can just pick up where you left off. Whenever you cut out, we kind of did a transition segment.
Okay, perfect.
So I think the last thing we heard was second semester.
Yeah.
No, second year, you guys were afforded the opportunity, and then we lost you.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. All right. There you go. This is like live radio in some respects with podcasting. So we got an 8-watt license, the FM radio station at the college, and we kind of lucked in to the Ottawa 67s. Didn't have a broadcaster, and so they, we had talked about wanting to get some credentials to cover their games, and they were like, "Well, do you want to broadcast our games?" And we were like, "Oh my God, that would be amazing!" And And just for perspective, at this time, this is the mid 90s, and the NHL had a lockout going on. So it was, the shortened season in the NHL, but like all these great talented players that should have been in the NHL, they all kind of got stuck in junior for this extended period. And it was the only game in town. So funny enough that the hockey team had basically turned down the commercial radio station CFRA in Ottawa and said, they basically said, all right, we'll give these kids a chance. Now, we were 8 watts. Now, we probably reached close to 200,000, 150,000 people in the west end of Ottawa, but you couldn't pick it up everywhere across town, right? Until maybe late at night in an empty parking lot, depending on, but we got a chance to call these games and to have these opportunities and running around, and this was all part of the experience. And to all of a sudden, it was kind of, practical. It was part of, the course of the amount of hours you were supposed to commit to the radio station every week. It was amazing. It was, and it really taught me I was doing what I wanted to do. And I was passionate about it. So, for me, the program was great. It taught me a lot. It's funny because the broadcast program immediately after graduating became this brand new state-of-the-art multimedia building. So it was all digital and it was all this new high tech. And so probably everything that I had learned was effectively outdated by the time I graduated. Like I was learning, honestly, I learned how to edit with a razor blade. I was still cutting and taping, and I don't think I'm that old, but I guess I am. But yeah, we'd learn how to edit tape, commercials, music, and all that. And the reel to reel, you'd break out you'd have the razor blade in your mouth, you cut the tape, and then you put it together with a splicing tape, and then okay, how does that sound? Like, all right, okay, I figured it out, and that's how we did it. And I would say most stations were starting to go digital by that point, but I lucked into landing a job at a radio station called Shea 106 in Ottawa, right out of school, and kind of working in the newsroom, kind of being a jerk of all trades. And they were still reel to reel for another year and a half, I want to say. So my skills were transferable to that newsroom at the time. And then when they ultimately went digital, I was able to kind of learn the editing system there. So I had some experience, but it was funny to, that was probably the one radio station that I was lucky enough that it was still razor blades and reel to reel editing. So long before Razor Ramon, I was dropping the original Razor's Edge in radio.
That's amazing.
That's a great segue. That's awesome. Razor Ramon, that's great.
Yeah, I remember though, like you said, I know us coming, like Adam did a victory lap in high school, which meant when I was in grade 12, he still had some classes with me.
We called that grade 13. I mean, we still had OAC at that time. And you know what? I didn't get all my OACs. I actually stayed for the victory lap, if you will, Adam. So I'm with you, buddy. But I needed it. I was a late birthday, so I was too of I wouldn't have been mature enough at 17 to start.
No, he came back for the sports.
Yeah, man, I came back from football. And I broke my foot in the semifinal game, so it's all good.
Oh no.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when I tried to take out a 300-pound defensive lineman playing quarterback. So hey, I kind of deserved it.
What school?
We live in Cornwall, so it was called Citadel. We were a French school.
Okay.
Yeah, Citadel.
That sounds familiar. They had a pretty good football program, if I'm not mistaken.
They did for years, and then they shut it down. And then when I was in grade 10 when they came back, so I played grade 11, whatever it was. Yeah, but yeah.
But random fun fact about Cornwall, by the way. I went to a Monday Night Raw taping in Cornwall 2 nights after the Montreal screw job. And it was in those days that they were live every other week. So they did a show in Ottawa the night before, but I was working in radio and there was a municipal election going on. So I couldn't go that night, which I was choked about because it was like right after the whole Bret Hart stuff. And, but I went to Cornwall 2 nights later, and it was the one and only time I appeared on Monday Night Raw. There's a about a 1 or 2 second shot of me doing the holding up a DX, sitting ringside with my buddy Mark Da Silva. So there you are. November '97, Cornwall.
Yeah, we're gonna find that and put that as your picture on the.
That's how I think I've got it on my Instagram page. I think I posted
great.
a few years
I'll
ago.
take a look
so,
for it.
Yeah.
But Adam and I both applied to the radio broadcasting. And he
did not get it.
No,
I went to I did media communications to start.
Okay, I was gonna say I got in.
Yeah.
But I decided not to go into that field. But we are aspiring to be, the radio's version of Dan and Jay.
Yeah.
Or Jay and Dan. Because we definitely did not have the faces for TV.
Well, Dan was another Algonquin guy.
Yeah, Dan, it was Dan. Yeah, that's right. Because I interviewed a professor. I don't remember his name because, again,
Adam in school didn't work.
Well, just, me remembering things that didn't happen yesterday also don't work. But he said, I remember him telling us Dan was there. I can't remember what year he was there. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Dan was, I think Dan's first year was right after I had graduated.
Okay.
So I think we missed each other. We knew of each other. And it's funny because Dan and we ultimately worked together at TSN together for a few years. But he was at Algonquin right after I had been there. And then I want to say I first met Dan in Edmonton. He was working either in Edmonton or Fort McMurray. And I often had to go on assignment when I was in Vancouver, especially my first year or so. I was the only guy on the West Coast when I worked for the Score. So I was kind of either in Calgary or Edmonton once every 4 weeks, I would say. And yeah, I think I met Dan there first, and then Dan not long after was working for City TV in Vancouver, and then he was only there a couple of months, and then he landed at TSN, and obviously the rest, as they say, is history. Obviously, because you guys wanted to be Jay and Dan. So.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're a little better looking than we are, but it's all right.
Yeah.
That's makeup. Right. It's a lot of makeup. Yeah. Onright's not that good looking a guy. I'm kidding, Jay. In case he's listening.
Well, we've had him on.
Yeah,
so.
he was on. Came on the show in January.
Yeah. It was
okay.
He was a riot. We actually filmed quite late in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
He was driving. The whole interview was done on his way from his home to tapings at TSN. So it was like just dark, him and his SUV, and then ended up we finished the recording as soon as he got to the TSN parking lot and said I had to go in and start warming up, whatever his warm up consists of.
That's multitasking.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah,
it is. It was impressive. It would have made great content if he would have gotten pulled over.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky for him, he didn't. But,
no, those guys, honestly, Jay and Dan, working with those guys for years, just, more important beyond being colleagues, like they were good friends. And, sometimes distance and time, you don't get a chance to connect as much. But, it's funny when his girls, well, they're not little girls anymore, but his daughters are he was on about an 18-month path older than when I got started as a parent. And so when we were in Toronto, him and his ex-wife at the time, they would give us, or his ex-wife now, but his wife at the time, they would give us clothes, like the hand-me-downs that our daughter would use until she kind of grew out of it. And then they had another daughter. And so it was like the circle of life, like these onesies and shirts there for probably like 0 months to about 2 years. Dan provided a lot of clothes for my oldest daughter. Yeah. And Jay, obviously, Jay's just such a fun guy. I mean, and just so incredibly talented and witty. And I think generationally, you guys talk about wanting to be like Jay and Dan. I mean, those guys really, years from now, and I mean, we already do talk about it. I think they've set the table for, inspiring a whole new wave of broadcasters and sports fans in terms of having fun with their sports and a sort of style, that's sort of, a comedy, or at least having fun while still enjoying the game. And I think that's important because I think sports at times has become very serious. And, I look at, from an analytics standpoint, like as a kid, I loved the box scores, when I was little, going to the newspaper and scouring the stats and all of it. So, I mean, there is a part of me that is a stat head, but so much of it is all analytically driven these days. And for me, there's still an element of just wanting, there's still an eyeball test of just watching a game and seeing, okay, like, who was shit tonight and who was good tonight. And it's like, okay, well, the numbers say it was actually pretty good. And it's like, well, you know what? I don't know. It was like, and there's still, I think you can draw from both. But I just, give me I still think the eyeball test matters.
I tend to agree. I can memorize stats and records and that kind of stuff, but different feel when it comes to watching compared to some numbers. It's not the same.
No, it's not.
Which I think you see in Kyle Dubas's tenure in Toronto went numbers wise, numbers, and it did not work out.
No. Well.
Yeah, I'll say that. I mean, I love what I love the gamble that Dubas did with the Carlson trade. If they can stay healthy, I don't love their goaltending. I'm stunned that they ran it back for another 5 years with Tristan Jarry like they did. But I mean, I have long been on Team Sid, and I have long been Team Carlson. So I mean, it's a hell of a gamble. If they can stay healthy, I mean, they'll be fun to watch. I mean, the Penguins are going to be must-see. I mean, the Penguins have been must-see TV for the last 15 plus years, and now they're really must-see TV. This upcoming season.
It's all about health at this point, since everybody, anybody that's worth anything on their team is north of 30.
North of almost 35.
Carlson's not 35.
Well, no, Carlson's what, 31, 32?
Okay.
I mean, he's early 30s, but I mean, Letang's 37. Sid
36.
Sid's birthday. Yeah, Sid's birthday was this week or last week. And he's an 87, so he's 36, and then Gino, I think, is
Erik Karlsson is actually 33.
Okay, there we go.
All right, there you go.
Yeah. So I want to ask you. So when you were broadcasting, I know I'm kind of going back a little bit here, but when you were broadcasting the 67s, were you guys like play-by-play and filming, or what was going on? Like, what were you guys doing?
Radio. No film.
Radio. No film.
No, just radio. So we would, but we'd set up our mixer and put our headsets on and patch into the phone line and that was and off we'd go. And we did everything. We did a whole pregame show, like our group. There were 4 of us: Michael Gossack, Scott Kitching, and Jamie Robichaux. And Gossack and I were kind of the tandem, and then for one of the games, and then Jamie and Scott would do the others. And it was kind of the 4 of us to start. And I think Algonquin for a brief while actually used it as a selling feature that, hey, like, you're going to get a chance to call games. And I don't know how long the deal lasted. I think ultimately, I think the 67s landed a commercial deal at some point as well. But at that time, it was just a tremendous opportunity for us. And we'd go in, I'd get down, I'd be at the rink hours before the game. I'd go to practice probably once or twice a week just to kind of, when I was the same age as a lot of those guys too, right? So, Kevin Weeks was the goalie for the 67s for that period.
Right.
There was Steve Washburn, who was a high prospect for the Panthers, who had a handful of games in the NHL. Sean Donovan, who played for years. role player, hard nosed. Dono was kind of a leader. He had played at the World Juniors during that time. Craig Hillier was kind of 1A with Kevin Weeks, and he became a first round pick later. I think actually it was the Penguins, funny enough, who took him. So there were some prospects that were there, but the 67s that particular year, they weren't very good. They missed the playoffs. Brian Kilray was just the GM. Peter Lee, who had been the legendary scorer for the team in the 1970s, he had been head coach, and it didn't work, and Killer was back behind the bench. So yeah, we did those games, but we'd go and we'd interview the coach for the other team pregame, and usually a player like whatever big star player. Jeff O'Neill was playing for Guelph in those days. O-Dog, who was the only junior player to turn me down for an interview, which I held over his head when we worked together at TSN years later. But you just think guys coming through. Ed Jovanovski was the first overall pick that year, and Jovo and Eddie. Obviously, I spent 4 years covering Eddie later in Vancouver, and really got a lot of time for Jovo. Brett Lindros was playing for Kingston at that time, and yeah, it was just I loved it. I mean, I just loved the experience. Getting on the bus, riding the bus with some of the players. Alan McCauley, who is now the assistant general manager of the Philadelphia Flyers, who had a fantastic, or was a couple of years later was the junior hockey player of the year in the CHL. A few years later, he was a part of that team. He was a youngster with that group, and then Alan obviously had was the key piece in the Doug Gilmour trade when the Leafs finally traded him to New Jersey, and then obviously Mac played with the Leafs, and then played with San Jose Sharks and with the LA Kings as well. But anyway, just tremendous. I loved the experience with junior hockey, and obviously with that experience that it provided me to to kind of have that opportunity with Algonquin. I mean, we kind of, I'll say this, Algonquin gave us the platform and the opportunity. I don't think I was anybody's teacher's pet with the profs, because I don't think, there was a guy named Norm Wright and Don Crockford were the two real heads of the department. Neither of them couldn't have given a shit about sports. Like, I mean, it could have been, you could have been telling them it was horseshoes instead of hockey. They didn't care about sports, but I think they ultimately recognized the value in terms of us landing the broadcast deal that we did with the Ottawa 67s, and I think that was pretty significant.
That's pretty wicked. Actually, fun fact: Goodnight Jim Kite was actually my computer teacher in college.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
was he really? Eh?
No,
Jim's a tough guy.
Yeah, well, I'm actually friends with his nephew. And I'd been friends with his nephew since we were like 12 or 13. They live in Pembroke. So that's where my dad lives, obviously. And so yeah, I go into class, and he comes in the first class this semester. He's like, "All right, everybody, my name is Jim Kite." And I'm like, kind of half paying attention. I'm like, "What do you mean?" I put my hand up immediately. I'm like, "Excuse me, like, sir, did you just say your name is Jim Kite?" He's like, "Yes, I did." Everyone's looking at me like, what are you asking this guy for? I'm like, "Dude, this is fucking Goodnight Jim Kite. Like, you kidding me right now?" And no one knew who he was. And I'm like, "You got to be kidding me." So I went up to him after. I'm like, is this? He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "How'd you know?" I was like, "Well, I'm friends with all 4 of your nephews," because he's got his son had 4 boys. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All great.
That's funny. Players. What a small world. My dad, when he was in high school, went to Rideau High in Ottawa, and one of the teachers at the school was Russ Jackson. Now, I don't know if you guys know the name Russ Jackson, but Russ Jackson is considered one of the greatest players in CFL history, and was the last, is kind of the GOAT for Canadian quarterbacks. So last year, when Nathan Rourke was balling with the BC Lions, every week there seemed to be a stat comparing him to Russ Jackson. But Russ Jackson was the man. He was the star quarterback for the Ottawa Rough Riders, and then kind of retired on top, at the end of, he was retired before even I was born. But my dad tells a story that he was arguing with a math teacher. So you talk about Goodnight Jim Kite. So you were not allowed to talk football with Mr. Jackson. Like, there was Mr. Jackson, who was the rock star, but for football, but Mr. Jackson in the school hallways did not suffer fools, right? And so he you couldn't talk football anyway. My dad tells a story about how he got in an argument with this other teacher, and I think he was a smaller teacher, and Mr. Jackson came over and grabbed my dad and threw him against the locker because I think you could in those days still. And you know, my dad tells the story of, you know, getting the forearm in his throat and basically Mr. Jackson suggesting that, you know, do you want to try me? And just the way my dad had told the story years later, he was like, man, it would be like, you know, imagine your fucking hero wanting to kick your ass. He's like, imagine Wayne Gretzky grabbing you and throwing you against the locker, wanting to beat the shit out of you. He goes, that's how I kind of felt in that moment. Like, I just want an autograph. Like, don't kill me, right? And funny enough, my dad's, I guess maybe the tough love worked because he became a police officer years later. But yeah, so there's your good night, Jim Kite, Russ Jackson,
Love it.
comparable.
That's great.
So I forget, maybe it was even your own podcast, but I remember watching like a segment where you were talking about being offered the, you know, you were flown out to Vancouver or whatever to do some testing for the NHL video games and being the voice, and then finding out that you got it. And it was like right before you went on, like, I don't know if it was like a family trip or something. You were at like an airport. But just that whole, I remember watching that video and just like almost getting chills of like, how cool is that?
Hell yeah.
I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, now that's research, Joel. Nicely done.
Well, that was that, and this happened like even before we set a date. You know, like I had originally reached out to you, and when you agreed, I'm like, that's solid. And then probably, you know, the algorithm of your phone,
yeah,
doing research or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, was just like, here's some James Cybulski info for you. But it was very cool, and like I said, it was just, you know, similar to what I've said so many times to different people, where it's just, you know, to all the guys that played like Junior B or Junior A, and the dream was going to the show. Me knowing that I wasn't good enough to go to the show, I was looking for, you know, commentary or different outlets in sports, and in that kind of, that story reminded me of that, where, you know, you were pumped to be able to do like the voice for the NHL because you had played for so long.
Yeah, so for me, this goes back about 5 years ago now, and this was in spring of 2018, and I was hosting a podcast with Davis Sanchez, who's now an NFL analyst and CFL analyst on TSN. And Davis and I were doing some work with the Canadian Football League, but we would talk all the time, just brainstorming what we were going to do a show. And one of Davis's best friends, Sean Ram Jagsing, they played high school ball together. And Sean's 7 feet tall, and he is one of the heads, basically the head of the NHL video game franchise with Electronic Arts. Anyway, he had just said he was talking to Rammer, and he said, "Oh, they're auditioning a new. It sounds like they're auditioning, you know, broadcasters for. They're looking for a new broadcast team for the video game." And it kind of rattled off, you know, I guess some potential candidates that might be going. And I thought, man, that would be so much fun. And I remember just saying to Jesse, I said, "Do you think you could ask your buddy if I could, you know, just take a swing? Like, can I audition? Like,
Yeah,
you know, I'd love to just give it a shot."
Yeah.
He said, yeah. He goes, let me message him and see. And so, you know, true to his word, a couple days later, I got an email from somebody from the legal team with Electronic Arts, and they were out of California, these people. And they said, "Look, we'd like to schedule an audition for you. Your name's come up, and we'd like to schedule an audition." So I was like, "Great. What day, you know, how about this? How about 10 a.m. On this Tuesday morning or whatever?" And that day we had a family vacation booked for actually to go to Maui, which based on the time that we're recording this interview, I extend my well wishes to everybody and my heart condolences to what's happened over there. But here we were getting ready to take 4 kids, all, I think the oldest at the time, 5 years ago, my oldest is 15 now. So, we got basically 10 to 3. So 10, 2
Wow.
7-year-olds and a 3-year-old. And so it was like, okay, we got a busy day. We got to get through customs. We got a lot of ish to pack up and get out there. And I had just finished my morning radio show earlier that morning. So I kind of scrambled from the radio studio. I boot out to the East End to where the Electronic Arts studios are. I meet with them and I go in and the audition, I think, just went, I kind of came out of there and I had known I think I made a fairly favorable impression. I had a really nice conversation with some of the producers and I think I'd popped them a couple times, made them laugh on a couple of my, my auditions, and they just basically showed me some footage. It was almost like on a black and white monitor, and they said, just call it as you see it. Like, it doesn't matter about getting names right or anything at this point, but just call it as you see it. And so
I can't hear you.
hold on.
Oh, there we go.
Let's see. Hold on here. All right. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're back? Okay.
You cut out
Sorry.
at the like the black and white monitor. You made them laugh a couple times, and then
Yes. Yeah. So this is quite the technological adventure here today, right? Like between my computer overheating, headphones dying, all of it. So long story short, I think I kind of walked out going, I don't know what just happened, but I think it went well, and then obviously scrambled to the airport, and off we go, and and kind of forgot about it for a lack of honestly, just hadn't thought about it, because next thing you know, you're on vacation, you're on a beach for a week and having a good time with the fam, and then you just kind of get back into your routine and rinse and repeat. And I think maybe a week or two later, I want to say that I thought, I'm just glad I auditioned. I'm glad I'm glad I took my swing at the plate. And then a month goes by, and I get an email from somebody from Electronic Arts that says, hey, just so you know, we've shortlisted our candidacy, and you're still on the list. You've made the short list, and we hope to have a decision in the next 7 to 10 days. I was like, all right, still in the game. Thanks. That's pretty cool. And I was like, oh, hey, how about that? And then crickets for another month. And so it was kind of one of those like, you know what, man, I'm just, I made a short list. That's pretty cool. Like that, that if nothing else, I could say that. And then a month goes by, and I get an email saying, look, we'd like to schedule a chemistry test with you and another talent. And it was like, oh, well, this just kind of got interesting. So I go down for a follow-up audition, and I meet Ray Ferraro in the parking lot. And so Ray and I had worked together at TSN, and it was like, oh my gosh, if I'm doing this with Ray, this has got to be serious, because I know these guys love Ray, and Ray had been a part of the prior versions of the game from years past. So anyway, I'm like, oh my gosh, man, I know these guys love you. And he said, well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because it sounds like you really made a favorable impression. And so anyway, we went in for a quick audition. They liked it. And then crickets again. and then another month goes by, and they're like, okay, we need you to come back for one more audition. And now it's like, this has gone on for 3 months. And now it's like, okay, I want this. Like, this is, oh my God, now I am invested. And so I get the call to come in for another audition. I go in, and and basically it was more of a talk to say, look, you're kind of an unknown. Nobody really knows who you are from an American standpoint south of the border. You're not a conventional play-by-play guy in terms of, the past voices. You're talking about Mike Emmerich, like Doc Emmerich. You're
Yeah.
talking about Jim Houston. You're talking about Gary Thorne. Like, you're talking about iconic Hall of Fame play-by-play guys who have done it now on a national level for years. And now it's like, who in the blue hell is James Cybulski? So I said, look, I've got I've got big boy pants, and I can take it if people want to be critical. And I just said, look, as somebody who played the game, I would treat it with the utmost respect, and I'm in it to win it. And they said, okay, well, we'll let you know in a week. And honestly, like, true to their word, it was 7 days, almost to the minute, that I waited, like every text, every email, every phone call. Like, is this it? Is this it? It was just, like the longest week of my life. And that following Friday when they called, and it was Sean Ramjagsing, and he said, hey, we'd like for you to be our guy. And we'd like for you to be our voice of, the next NHL 20 at the time. And I've been fortunate to do a lot of really cool things. I've worked hard and traveled to see events and all of it, but to have the opportunity to be a part of such an iconic franchise that I kind of grew up playing, and I know everybody kind of defaults to NHL '94, but man, I was 19, and for NHL 90, I was 18, 19 when that game came out, right? Like, that was my jam, my Sega Genesis, and scoring off the one-timers, and that was the only how I score these days too. And honestly, a total dream come true. And I've been very fortunate along the way to have this now for, I guess, 4 different versions. So I mean, I'm sure years from now they'll all be just sitting in a discount bin going, oh, look at these old copies. But I can at least say I had a small footnote in the history of a pretty iconic franchise.
So, out of curiosity, and this is something I've thought of for years, like just playing the game, how long does it take for you to record? Because most names are recorded.
Mm-hmm.
How long does it take you to get through every sound clip that you need or they need to develop the game? Like, this is has to be over days, right?
Oh, I get I would say I get contracted to do about 250 to 300 hours annually.
Jesus.
So yeah, so that's where it kind of and I think they roll over some of the content from what I've done from year one. There's stuff there's stuff that works, there's stuff that they don't, there's stuff that they replace with. But yeah, I would say probably don't get the full 300 annually, but I would say that probably at least 250 and with the various years. So I would say there's probably close to 1,000 hours worth of content that I have recorded for the game over the last 5 years. And so, I mean, it's hard for somebody to sit there and say, this is redundant. I hear that all the time. I mean, some might trigger more than others, but I can tell you this, like, we've added a lot of layers of commentary to it. And we add every year, right? So, yeah, but that's where it is.
Do they give you the creative freedom to you're like, let me try this out, like a catchphrase or something, or is everything written for you?
No, we've got a lot of flexibility. It's basically this is the context we need, and you put it in your own words. So
very cool.
Whether it's a glove save or a pass, but like there's a lot of redundant stuff, right? When you're going up the ice, like a pass to the entering the offensive zone, just saying it 10 different ways without saying it the same way, but maybe just slightly different.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So, gains the zone, across the line, moves in, steps across the blue line, all these little things that you don't notice. And what they do sometimes, kind of rein us in a little bit is if we get too cheeky. I think they want us to try to stay fairly authentic. We can have some fun from time to time, But and for the most part, they allow us a lot of flexibility and a lot of free reign. But if it's just like across the line with a side of poutine, it's just a little, okay, it's a little out there. And so, but Danny Lopes, one of our producers, he's with me for every audio session, and he does a good job of cracking the whip when I need to be kicked in the A double crooked letter, and at the same time, he also he's nerdy enough like I am to allow some subtleties. I mean, legalities, you got to watch what you say in terms of, there's a lot of stuff with copyright infringement, right? So pretty much every context that we say has to be vetted through a legal department. But if there's if there's a certain catchphrase that somebody's already taken, or you can't say like, man, whatever it may be, is like, Mark Wahlberg would appreciate that or something. It's like, I can't use Mark Wahlberg or something, and just because of those certain things. But have some fun with it. Like, you can't reference alcohol because it's rated E for everyone. So the fans are gonna go, hey, grab a cold one, like, I can't really say that, and so
that's fair.
I know you're strapped for time. I'll end on one. It's a quick two-parter. It's a 2-word answer. So first part is toughest name to pronounce whenever you're recording.
Oh, you know what? There's a few. We probably got close to 5,000 names in now.
Yeah.
And because we've added really junior rosters, we've added American Hockey League, I think the Coast, and then community names. For me, years back, like Cybulski might as well have been in hieroglyphics at one time when I was a kid. Like, nobody could pronounce Cybulski, and I think the diversification of not only living here in Canada for us, but throughout North America, and as hockey has become more of a global game, it's great. Like, that's one cool thing that I love, and to be able to to have my name in the video game, and to be able to throw that out there, what I've done on social in years past, where I've said, hey, look, if your name's not in the game, send me your name, give me the phonetic pronunciation, and we'll do our best to try to get it in. Where it's tricky is sometimes you just get some names that there's no prior context, like the person's not on any sort of professional registry, and then you try to look online, like, okay, well, maybe is this guy a high school player or a university player? Maybe there's a highlight somewhere online that would exist, and so I would say years working in newsrooms, working as a broadcaster, having a last name like Cybulski, I've tried to be very mindful about trying to get names right. But every once in a while, I think I get it wrong, and then usually a year later we might. But I'll say this: like, we only have to do, I don't know, maybe about a half dozen to a dozen names out of hundreds annually. Like, maybe by the games come out. Like, I remember one. Matt Stajan's name was pronounced Stayan. Years back, and it was so glaring, because not to say that Matt Stajan was a top 5 player in the league, but because he was so prominent with the Toronto Maple Leafs, with arguably the most recognizable and the most visible franchise in the sport. Right. Stayan was just like, ooh, and I always thought to myself, like, I don't want to have one of those, right? And maybe there is someone maybe there is a name that I totally screwed up, that that nobody has just called me out on, or said, hey, it's not pronounced this way. It's because I think we would change it. But so in terms of like what's the toughest, there's a couple that we kind of come across, and we kind of pause the recording for 5 minutes trying to just scour between Danny and myself and going through pronunciation guides, and because you're trying to do it on the fly. Like, I think there was one year, a few years ago, we had a day I rattled off 1,300 names.
Wow. Oh my God.
Right. And we call them phone book sessions, and just, and you use these two stitches, they're called, where so it's like you pass the puck to, right? So there's your edit point for the audio team. That so like passes the puck to Joel, passes the puck to Adam, passes the puck to James, passes the puck to Smith, passes the puck to Gretzky, passes the puck. But you got to make sure you kind of maintain that intensity and that consistency all the way through, right? Because if you don't, then it's okay. It sounds like an old 1990s movie phone or an automated phone, or one of those governments or those Revenue Canada scam phone calls, right? So
yeah, that's great.
I try to avoid that. Thankfully, we have a really good bunch of editors who make me sound half decent.
And you know what? I always settled as a kid. Like Compo was never in any video games.
Yeah.
I don't even think there's been a professional athlete, at least in any of the EA games. So I always had to either pick for be a pro whenever I'd pass the puck. It was always thanks to Chris Campoli. And then whenever they integrated also the soccer names into the hockey, I had the Mexican version of Campos. So I always had to choose between those two, which was
there was Dave. There was Dave. Wasn't there a coach? There was a national. Was he with the Cowboys? Wasn't there Campo? There was Campo. There was Campo who was a coach, I think, at one time.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, I think in the 90s.
I had Andrew Ladd, so like my last name's Ladderoot, so it was great. I just used Ladd. So it was pretty much the same thing.
It's fun, man. It's funny to hear what people have done over the years. But I'll tell you this much, and no promises, but message me in October, and I will send a note to the producers, because they add names every year.
Okay.
And so send me a note in October, and we can add those names to the list. Because funny enough, somebody just messaged me. Somebody just texted me today, sent me a message on Instagram and said, "Hey, how do I get my name in the game?" So you're not the only one. And honestly, as somebody who's been there and would have long dreamed to have had their name in the game, that's one thing it's my own little internal pride that, hey, I get it. It was such a slim, but to hear your name broadcasted in a video game and have it properly done, it's it's fucking cool. And if I can help do that, then by all means. So thanks for having me on today, guys.
Yeah,
we appreciate it.
This is literally a great way to end. It's almost like my own little Make-A-Wish. This is, you don't know what you've done to
we cannot compare ourselves to Make-A-Wish.
No,
definitely not.
But if somebody,
but I appreciate the compliment.
If somebody was going to gift a middle-aged, or I don't know, middle-aged 28-year-old,
oh my God, you're not middle-aged, you're 28.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I didn't take.
Dude, I'm 48. I'm middle-aged.
Yeah,
you're not middle-aged.
So
you're in your 20s.
Late 20s, average men's league player, a gift. That is it.
That is it.
That is it.
There you go.
So thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure. We will be in touch. Love to have you on again in the future, and we can discuss, maybe some more improvements the three of us can work on for some EA stuff. We'll revitalize this game together.
Done. You guys take care. Thanks again for having me, boys.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Adam.
James.
Joel, take care. Cheers, boys.
Bye.